Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
January 22, 2020, the Dump the Regulators edition. We begin with that story as the NRA recently filed bankruptcy, indeed last Friday, and they did it so that they could extricate themselves from the legal imbroglio they find themselves in the state of New York, where they've been sued by the state attorney general for being basically a fraud claiming to be a nonprofit. And although there's nothing wrong with their financial position, it's simply a legal vehicle to escape New York law. It is just a wildly inane legal attempt to circumvent regulators in New York, where the NRA has been chartered now for 150 years. Every legal expert recognizes that this is a farcical try to extricate themselves from New York law, and legal experts say it's likely either to be rejected and or lead to a leadership purge. So the NRA, once again, takes the absolute worst position they can. Next up, from the New York Times, a federal district judge declined on Thursday to force Amazon to resume hosting the social networking app Parler on its cloud computing, saying to do so would not be in the public interest. Amazon kicked Parler off, which had become a gathering place for insurrectionists in the days after, or had been on the platform, but they were removed after the January 6th riot, an insurrection led, of course, by President Trump. Parler then sued Amazon, accusing the tech giant of not giving them warning and trying to get back on. But Parler failed to satisfy that sufficiently to moderate the violent and incendiary content on its site. Next up, in a case of wanting to take their ball home because they're mad, Google has threatened to remove its search engine from Australia over the nation's attempt to make the tech giant share royalties with news publishers. Australia is introducing this law to force Google, Facebook, and potentially other tech companies to pay media outlets for their media content. The tech giants have fought back, arguing the laws are onerous and would damage local access to services. What a load of BS. Google told the Australian Senate that laws were unworkable. And if this version of the code were to come law, Google would leave Australia. So don't play, if Google thinks you're playing ugly, they're going to take their ball and go home. And finally, should you as an employer pay your employees so that they'll get vaccinated? Well, a growing number of grocers are adopting a novel approach in the race to get their workers vaccinated against COVID-19. They're paying incentives. Aldi this week became the latest grocery chain to offer employees compensation for getting vaccinated, saying it would provide workers with 2 hours of pay for each of the 2 vaccine doses. The grocer also promised workers receiving the vaccine would not lose pay for missed hours from work, and that the grocer would also help them pay for the vaccinations themselves. So good news for employers, helping to employees not to be penalized for actually doing the right thing and getting the vaccines. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.